Sienna cast a frustrated glance at the taxi driver who seemed completely unaffected as he took an unnecessary detour. She was already late, and despite her requests to speed up, he maintained a slow pace. "I'm sorry, sir. Can't you go a bit faster?" she pleaded. The driver, calm and steady, reassured her. "Ma'am, why so anxious? We'll arrive on time." Realizing arguing was futile, Sienna resigned herself to her seat, gazing out at the city's nocturnal landscape. She reflected on how it had been nearly a year since this routine started, a fact she would have found unbelievable if someone had told her earlier. Her thoughts then drifted to her mother-in-law, who had been confined to her bed for the same duration without any signs of improvement. Despite her mother-in-law's harsh demeanor, Sienna harbored no ill will. She understood that beneath the tough exterior, there wasn't genuine malice. Her mind wandered back to the rainy day when she and William, her then-fiancé, had dashed into his apartment seeking warmth. Her mother-in-law had sharply critiqued her. "Why do you flutter about like a dragonfly? Such a flighty girl. Why not help your parents instead of parading around William?" She warned William that Sienna would remain flighty even in marriage. While William had initially defended Sienna, his support seemed to wane after their wedding. Throughout their first year of marriage, her mother-in-law made it a point to visit daily, conducting what Sienna felt were inspections. She would run her fingers across surfaces, searching for dust, and scrutinize every corner of their home. Though she never raised her voice, her disdainful gaze made Sienna feel diminished, as if she were an insignificant bug under scrutiny. Initially, this treatment intimidated Sienna, but over time, she adapted, realizing her mother-in-law was likely just bored. Sienna found a quiet satisfaction in those moments when her mother-in-law found nothing to criticize, which was often the case. Raised by her own mother to keep an orderly home, Sienna had honed her skills as a homemaker. Sienna had always been taught the value of discipline and cleanliness, thanks to her military upbringing. As a child, she often resisted this strict regime, feeling that her parents were being too harsh. However, as an adult, she appreciated the solid foundation it gave her, realizing it equipped her well for life's challenges. As time passed, Sienna even began to anticipate the visits from her mother-in-law with a peculiar sort of eagerness. Her husband William had started a career as a long-haul truck driver, which meant he was often away for weeks at a time. The loneliness of the empty apartment weighed heavily on Sienna during these periods. While work provided a distraction during the weekdays, the weekends were particularly tough, often leaving her feeling isolated and despondent. In contrast, her mother-in-law's grumbling presence somehow made the days more bearable. Despite the older woman's constant nitpicking, their interactions had become a source of entertainment for Sienna. She would share stories about her work, her plans for the future, and updates about William, while her mother-in-law would interject with criticisms about everything from the way Sienna folded clothes to her choice of household items. One day, as Sienna was reorganizing the closet, her mother-in-law dove in, fussing about the potential wrinkles in the clothes. "Sienna, who taught you to fold your clothes like this? They'll get all wrinkled," she complained. Sienna, seeing an opportunity for lighthearted banter, suggested, "Mom, speaking of clothes, maybe it's time for a new robe for you? Something comfy for the summer?" Their banter continued with Sienna suggesting they buy soft slippers she had seen on sale, to which her mother-in-law responded with a non-committal mumble, but continued her inspection. It seemed that these interactions reassured William that all was well at home, which might have been why he gradually stopped defending Sienna from his mother's criticisms. He once offered to restrict his mother's visits, but Sienna, not wanting to escalate things, firmly declined the idea. A couple of years into this routine, William's mother suddenly fell ill. It happened so subtly at first that Sienna didn't immediately notice her absence. Engrossed with year-end deadlines at work, she barely kept track of the days. When a weekend passed without the familiar knock of her mother-in-law, Sienna felt a pang of concern. She had even considered giving her a key to the apartment not long before. Without any response to her calls and with William on the road, Sienna decided to take action herself. She traveled an hour by train to her mother-in-law's home. Upon arrival, she found the door unlocked. Stepping inside, she was greeted by the sound of a harsh, racking cough from the bedroom. Rushing in, she found her mother-in-law drastically changed. Her face was pale and her cheeks flushed with fever, a stark contrast to the formidable figure she once knew. Wrapped in blankets, she looked frail and barely recognizable. Wrapped in 2 blankets, shivering with every cough. "Why didn't you call me?" Sienna asked, her tone a mix of concern and reprimand. Without hesitation, Sienna sprang into action. She brewed soothing tea, simmered nutritious broth, and swiftly called for a doctor to make a house visit. The doctor recommended hospitalization, but her mother-in-law stubbornly refused. "All right, let her stay at home." "I'll take care of her," Sienna declared, and she meant every word. Each day after finishing her work, she visited, tending to her mother-in-law as long as the fever lasted. When her mother-in-law began to recover slightly, Sienna adjusted her visits to Wednesdays and weekends. Despite the fever subsiding, her mother-in-law stayed weak. She moved slowly, leaning against the wall for support, and ate very little, which worried Sienna. She tried discussing her concerns with her husband, but he seemed dismissive. "Well, what do you expect? Age takes its toll, and it was a long illness. She needs time to recover," he said. "What do you mean, age? Your mother is still young. You talk as if she's ancient. Don't you care at all?" Sienna countered. "Why should I worry when she has such great care? I'm even jealous. She sees you more often than I do," her husband replied, sounding slightly hurt. "I'm sorry, I know that, but I can't just abandon her." "How could she be alone?" Sienna responded. "Then why don't we hire a caregiver?" her husband suggested. "No, I don't even want to think about that. Hiring a stranger when her children are alive and well? Who knows how she'd be treated?" Sienna argued. So, Sienna continued to care diligently for her mother-in-law. She cooked meals, cleaned the already tidy house, managed the laundry, and cherished the moments of conversation with her. These chats were a joy for both women. During these times, her mother-in-law seemed to rejuvenate, sharing tales of her youth, her first love, her husband, her parents, and even her own challenging mother-in-law. I didn't like her one bit. Oh, what a difficult woman she was. Always complaining to my husband about me. If I did something right, it went unnoticed. But if I slipped up, she was merciless. She drove me so mad that I once ran away to my parents' house just to escape her criticisms, her mother-in-law recounted with a mix of frustration and nostalgia. As Sienna listened, she couldn't help but smile, recognizing the cycle of family dynamics, understanding more deeply the woman who had become such an integral part of her life. Sienna couldn't help but smirk, recalling her mother-in-law's meticulous daily inspections of her home. She kept her thoughts to herself, considering that, if even half of these tales were true, she had it relatively easy. Her mother-in-law continued, sharing stories about William's childhood, his milestones, and reflecting on how times had changed since then. They often spent their evenings chatting, creating a special bond. Normally, after their talks, Sienna would hurriedly pack her things to catch the last suburban train home to her husband, who had just returned from a long trekking route. However, tonight was different. The taxi driver had taken an excruciatingly long time to find a parking spot, causing Sienna to miss her train. Reluctantly, she handed the driver a large bill, annoyed that he had the audacity to charge her the nighttime rate. Tired, Sienna trudged up the steps and quietly opened the door to her mother-in-law's apartment. As soon as she entered, she paused, hearing her mother-in-law's voice unusually loud, resonating through the space. "Yes, Sage, she's gone now. The last train's left. What about Sienna?" "Sienna's great. I feel a bit guilty lying to her." "Oh, Sage, don't lecture me about conscience. I know it well enough without you, but I can't tell her the truth." "Why? Remember how you once pretended to be sick to get your son-in-law to fix your washing machine? Well, I've gotten used to having Sienna around. At least I can talk to her. My son doesn't pay much attention to me, you know that. And I got lucky to have such a daughter-in-law. She's a gem. With her, my life isn't so burdensome. Otherwise, it's just me, and I can't take it anymore." So I can't and won't admit the truth now. If I do, I'll be alone, and I can't allow that to happen. Sienna felt her heart sink, her back pressed against the wall as she processed the shocking revelation. Her mother-in-law was perfectly healthy and had been feigning illness just to keep Sienna around. Stunned and unsure of what to do next, Sienna decided to keep the information to herself for the moment. She could confront her mother-in-law about the deception later. Quietly stepping back into the hallway, Sienna closed the door, knocked, and then, after a brief pause, re-entered the apartment. "Mom, are you still up? Can you believe it? The taxi driver took so long that I missed the last train. Can I stay here tonight?" she called out, giving her mother-in-law a moment to resume her role. "Oh, Sienna, of course, stay. It goes without saying. Did you call William?" her mother-in-law replied, quickly slipping back into character. Sienna nodded, her mind racing as she pondered her next steps, caught between the deception and the unexpected dependency her mother-in-law had revealed. "Yes. I called and let him know I'll be leaving early in the morning." "Make yourself at home," Sienna assured her mother-in-law, who had already drifted off to sleep. However, Sienna found herself restless, unable to sleep as she mulled over the conversation she had unintentionally overheard. Initially, she was flooded with anger about the deception. But as she lay there, thoughts of her own future loneliness crept in her children, potentially distant, her growing old alone. She empathized deeply with her mother-in-law's solitude. "William, we need to bring your mom to live with us," Sienna declared firmly the next morning, explaining the previous night's revelation. "I suspected something was off. She couldn't be sick this long without any real symptoms. But where would we put her? We're already tight on space. And what about when we have kids?" William questioned, concerned about the logistics. Sienna hesitated, then shared, "We will have kids, William, very soon. I forgot to mention, I'm pregnant. Does Mom know?" "No, I haven't told her yet." "But William, what do we do about your mom?" "We need to think it through," William concluded. And think it through they did. Eventually, they combined their savings, sold their cramped apartment, and purchased a spacious, well-built house in the suburbs. It boasted 4 rooms, a glassed-in veranda, a lush garden, and even a small vegetable patch. They moved her mother-in-law in and relocated themselves. When they shared the news of the impending grandchild, her mother-in-law was overjoyed, and Sienna found herself moved to tears by the genuine happiness in her mother-in-law's eyes. The older woman had grown quite sentimental in recent times. Once settled, her mother-in-law came to Sienna with a heavy heart. "Daughter, I have to confess my conscience is eating at me. I wasn't really sick. It just felt so comforting to have you around. But now, I'll help with the baby, and I'll sign over the apartment to you. You're not mad at me, are you?" Sienna paused from hanging up the laundry, turned, and embraced her mother-in-law. "I'm not mad, Mom. I enjoyed taking care of you, and I'll do it again if needed. We're family, and I'm not upset at all." "Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you, Sienna dear." The 3 women stood in the middle of the yard, embracing and smiling at each other. From the window, William IV watched the scene unfold, feeling a profound sense of peace and harmony within the family, grateful for the love and understanding that bridged the generations.